They need to work on that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
No.
Did you understand it though?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh, no, not this one. This is the grand finale of this.
Okay, so that's
Yeah, that's the last one.
you want to go to
That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right. Don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. And then it was like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? But don't do it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Come on. That's crazy. Right.
Oh, yeah, so you can see how well it fits because today we're going to talk about becoming or being the best interpreter that you can be of life. It's a really good message for Father's Day. And so we've been looking at Abraham as we've been looking at this summer series on character building. So just to let you know, you have nowhere to go. I've got to do 2 sermons, Abraham and Father's Day. So we'll be here a while. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not interpreting that way. No, it really is a good time, and it's a fun thing to take a look at something like that because I think if you're saying what is a father supposed to do, what is a mother supposed to do, one of the most difficult things that you will do, but one of the most necessary is you have to be the one that helps your kids interpret life. You do. It's not that easy. In fact, one of the problems, and I have this problem too because preachers are really bad about this, is we try to oversimplify life. We try to bring it back to some very simple principles, and then all of a sudden your kid's in a situation where they're like, but that didn't work, and you're like, well, yeah, but most of the time it's like that. But then, and you're like, well, I don't understand. That's the way life works sometimes. Sometimes life is difficult to figure out and to understand, why is it working this way? Why did it turn out this way? In fact, I absolutely know that some of the adults in here, you could stand up and say, you know what, man, I had to learn some hard lessons in life, didn't you? Because here's how I thought it was supposed to be, and when it didn't turn out that way, man, I was just kind of blown away. My own wisdom or my idea that I knew what was going on and I was in control, all of a sudden that was just shattered, and I thought, man, now what do I do? An interpreter says, this is what you do. This is where you turn. This is where you look. And I think if you look at Abraham's life, it's one of those lessons that Abraham has to learn, and it works really good as we start to deal with a message like this, and especially as we start talking to fathers. Here's where we ended up with Abraham. In fact, I'm going to throw the map back up to you. It will pop up on that screen. So if you weren't here last week, it was in your outline, but you can look up here because last week we sort of gave the journey of Abraham, and most people don't know Abraham's story. It comes real early in the book of Genesis, and Abraham is someone who lived down in down at the bottom of the Euphrates River, that little place called Ur. And his father, who is named Terah, he takes the family up toward Haran. But while he is in Ur, Abraham, God speaks to him. He gives him a vision, and he says, Abraham, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, and through your family, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's not going to happen in Abraham's lifetime, but it does happen about 2,000 years ago when Jesus Christ comes and changes the blessings to all nations and all families and all people. But this story of Abraham occurs probably 2,200, maybe 2,300 years before Jesus was around. He takes the family up to Haran. There God speaks to him again, and Abraham goes down south, about 600 miles from Ur to Haran, and about another 450 miles all the way down into Canaan, which is where he comes. There's a famine in Canaan, so he goes down through the Negev, which it doesn't have on the map there, but that's kind of that southern barren area down at the bottom of the Mediterranean, and he goes into Egypt. There he's in Egypt. He makes some mistakes himself, but he becomes fabulously wealthy. He comes back to the land of Canaan, and sort of there is where his story really kind of takes off as far as most people know and most people understand. But it's complicated. It's difficult to navigate through, and most of us really just don't catch or understand Abraham's story. In fact, if you grew up in church, or maybe you grew up in young life, this is what you understand about Abraham. You can sing this with me. Father, do you know this song? Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. They didn't laugh. Oh, you don't know this song? They didn't laugh. No, that's the word. They didn't laugh. You were not good students back. They didn't cry, no. All they did was go like this with a left, and a right. Oh man, I'm gonna have to teach y'all all the Young Life songs. And that's kind of how we understand Abraham. We sing about him, we understand, things that we've been taught about his character, but we really don't know the story of Abraham and just how much God used Abraham, how much he taught Abraham, how many difficult things God took Abraham through in order to build the character that he wanted to build into Abraham, to build it into his life. Now see, that's really important, because guess what? If Abraham goes through all that stuff to build character into his life, what do you think God's going to do with you? And what happens if you bail out and say, man, this is just too hard, I don't understand it, I quit, I'm running off somewhere else? What happens? You miss all the lessons. You miss everything that God wants to tell you, because, you're either kind of embarrassed by, the mistakes that you made, or you're kind of confused because you thought you had it all figured out. You didn't have it all figured out. And it was all built on this trust in God. And this trust in God means you're constantly going back to God and saying, God, I don't have it figured out. I'm struggling here. It's really difficult for me, because that relationship is paramount. And that's the reason God never lets you off of the hook of that relationship. Because if he did, you'd mess up. You'd think you got it all figured out, you go do it your way, and you just make a bigger mess of everything. But God constantly brings us back as he did with Abraham. So this is where we left Abraham last week. He goes through and he says, great, God, thank you for blessing me. Thank you for giving me all these things. But here's the one big problem that I have. Do you remember his one big problem? I don't have a child. I don't have a son yet. I have no heir. So someone who is not of my flesh and blood, who is in my household, and his household was enormous, because we just read last week how when he has to go and fight to rescue his nephew, he takes 330 able soldier men of his household. None of them are his flesh and blood, but they go and they fight for him, because that's the way households grew back in his day. And then there's this famous verse, which is the core of our belief. It is the core of our relationship to Christ. And here it is. This is in Genesis chapter number 15, verse 6. If you don't know this verse, it says, and Abraham, say this with me, and Abraham what? That's relationship, that's attachment, that's where I get it from. He believed God, he looked to God, he listened to God, he believed God despite everything else. And it says, and the Lord counted him as what? Righteous because of his faith. Does not mean that Abraham did not sin. It does not mean that Abraham did not do things that he should feel guilty about. He should. But God took his guilt and his shame upon himself so that relationally he could count himself as knowing God and being able to walk with God, when in and of himself he could never do that, but just like you and I couldn't. And so it's the core of who we are. In fact, it's a verse that's used all the time in the New Testament, and it's part of the theology of understanding who Jesus Christ himself is. In fact, Paul does this in Romans chapter number 8. He says this, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. Well, it doesn't mean that, we haven't done things wrong or we don't sin and we still don't, we somehow become perfect. It means Christ has taken, because of our belief, he has taken our sin upon himself. It has opened up a brand new relationship by which we know him and we can build that relationship to him. So let me jump on a few things here, because I think this story is that's in the next chapter is just incredible. And honestly, if you read it and you look at it, there are going to be some things in there that are going to make you really uncomfortable. I'm telling you ahead of time. But you should be uncomfortable with them. This is real life. This is the struggle of real life. And it's the story of God walking Abraham through and walking his wife Sarah through and walking others through real life stories that they couldn't always fix. They couldn't always get it to work the way they wanted it to work, but it was part of this confidence, this belief, this relationship, this faith that they had that God would watch after them and God would continue to work. And here we are over 4,000 years after Abraham, and we're still remembering Abraham's name and the promises that were given to him. So here, up on the, there it is, 10 years into Abraham's journey, let me give you some of the things. First of all, maybe you're like this. Abraham is filled with hopes, dreams, and promises. Anybody there? Yeah, man, when you're young, aren't you filled with hopes, dreams, and promises? Hopefully, when you get old, you're still filled with hopes, dreams, and promises. But many of us are not anymore. We've lost them somehow, or like I said, we somehow think, man, I just believe things and hope things, and that was a foolish thing for me to do. But here's his problem, because Abraham is still, say it with me again, he is still what? He is still, and he's saying, God, I understand. You give me these promises. You say you're going to make your descendants, more numerous than the sand of the seashore. You're going to make my descendants into a mighty nation. All these promises God gives. And Abraham says, it just doesn't work that way, because I still don't have a child. So here's what it says next. This is Genesis chapter 16. This is just an incredible chapter. Here's what it says. Now Sarah, so that's Abram, he's now Abram still, his wife. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. So let me explain. This means Sarah carries a tremendous amount of shame with her, a tremendous amount of guilt with her, because she is not young anymore. She's well advanced in years, past childbearing years in her life. And she is still struggling with this that she carries with her. And let me read further. It says in the next verse, it says, so Sarah said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. Real life stuff, that's what's so good about it. And Abram agreed with Sarah's proposal. So Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and if you remember on the map, they were down in Egypt, so apparently this is where they picked up someone else's family, and Hagar is a part of that, and they go back up with them, so she is an Egyptian. And it says, agreed with her proposal, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, gave her to Abram as his wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. Verse 4, so Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, catch this, isn't this the way it works? She began to treat her mistress Sarah with contempt. Yeah, because Sarah, I'm pregnant. I'm pregnant by Abram. You could never give Abram a child. It says, then Sarah said to Abram, here we go. This is all your fault. Any guys want to comment? Okay, right? This is all your fault. And which Abram has got to be sitting there saying, hang on, right? And it may be easy. You might think, that's what he should have said. He should, no. Let's go back and get the recording, the transcript here. You're the one that said, let's go do it this way. But here's the issue. And let me tell you, for dads, this is sometimes very difficult for dads to understand. You have to understand that's what Sarah felt. It doesn't matter that, that she was the one that came up with the suggestion. It does not matter. This is what she felt. Why did she feel this way? Because all this time before this, she was feeling what? She's feeling shame. I couldn't bear a child. And now that the child, I've come up with this idea that a child could come through Hagar, and now Hagar is pregnant, and now Hagar is treating me badly, saying, no. You know, it's none of that has gone away. None of it's been dealt with. And Abraham has to deal with it. He's going to have to learn and figure out how's he going to deal with it. If you haven't figured this out yet as a guy, as a dude, as a husband, as a father, you've still got a lot more pain ahead. Let me just tell you, it's going to be a difficult road ahead. Because in all relationships, you cannot just deal with the facts, you must deal with the emotion of the relationship. And the emotion of the relationship is very complicated. As my wife would say, if you talk to her afterwards, she says, oh yeah, but he's not that innocent either. And that's true. The emotion of men is very difficult to deal with, and the emotion, how men carry it and how they react, very difficult to deal with. This is the complexity of life. This is the part where you and I, if we try to figure it out on our own, we will usually only make it worse instead of making it better. Here's what it goes on to say. I love that, still love that part, right? This is all your fault. My dad was an OBGYN, and at the end of his career was when husbands were allowed, started coming in, you know, when the babies were born. And just to be honest with you, I mean, my dad didn't like it because it was a change of the way it was done. But he still said it was kind of his proof of why he didn't like it, because there's one lady who was having a baby. She's in contractions and incredible amount of pain. He said she looked up and leaned over and said, and I'll get you back for this, to her husband who was in the room, right? And my dad's like, woo, this is awkward. You know, I'm just trying to get us through this. And boy, you know, because when you're in the midst of pain, you don't care how you got there. You don't care that you were a part of getting there. It's just, man, I am in pain, and now I'm going to attach it to you, and I'll get you back for this. The good thing is my dad, guys, if you're in there and that happens, he says she didn't even remember saying it. So, you know, that's the good part of it. So this is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, and now she's pregnant. She treats me with contempt. The Lord will show you who's wrong, you or me. So she is calling him. It's good they didn't have 6 guns, right? Because she is absolutely calling him out on this issue, and God's going to judge between me or you, who's guilty in this, who is causing me to feel all this pain, and Abraham, God's going to get you for this. That's exactly what she's saying. Why? Because that's exactly what she's feeling. Number 3, I put down here, how did I get into, because this is what Abraham's thinking, how did I get into this no-win situation? My goodness, how did I get into this? See, part of being a good interpreter of life is you have to understand there are certain lessons or steps or things that you're going to go through, and there is not an answer or a thing that you can do and it goes away or you fix it. It doesn't work that way in everything. And for you to think that it is just a way oversimplification, naive approach to life. It's a lot more complicated than that. So even though Abraham may be feeling this, he also has to carry this with him. That's part of who he is. It's part of what he's supposed to do for Sarah and for this family that he has. I put in here, this is from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. I thought it was really good for those who, you might read this or as you hear this and say, that really offends me. I don't like that. How can a culture be that way? I thought we got rid of stuff like this. This is why I don't read the Bible. And I would tell you it's a very foolish thing for you to think that way, because cultures change all the time. They go through shifts all the time. And there's no way you can go back and judge a culture 4,200 years ago without first examining it and understanding how the culture worked back then. Here's what it says in the Bible Knowledge Commentary on this. It says this. It says, in the legal custom of that day, a barren woman could give her maid to her husband as a wife. And the child born of the union was regarded as the first wife's what? Yeah, it could happen. In fact, it goes on and explains how the husband would be the one to say, I adopt this child, and now the child would be the same as a natural heir to the family. So that was part of it. But it goes on to say in this commentary, so Sarah's suggestion was unobjectionable. You could not object to what she had just said. It did work that way in her day, according to the customs of that time. But I love this extra comment that the writers put in here. But God often repudiates social customs. In other words, the social customs are not the final word, but God himself, he is the one that has the final word. So here's how Abraham, this is how he deals with it. Abraham replied, "Look, she is your servant." This is a great way to deal with it, right? Sarah, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarah treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. Boy, that worked out good, didn't it? Man, we are all confused. We are all struggling. We are all in pain now. Now Hagar, who responded poorly to Sarah? But now Hagar has run away. She is pregnant with this child, and she has run away because it is so bad. It is so painful to be there. She can't stand it anymore. And she says, now I'm out of here also. So it's gone from bad to worse, to worse, to worse, to worse. I just look at Abraham and I think, there's no way that Abraham could be in this situation and not think, what have I gotten into? What is going on? How could things possibly end up this bad? How could they continue to crater like this? Yesterday morning, it kind of, helped me, kind of came to light. I was pulling up. The sun was just coming up, so it was starting to get light outside. And I'm, kind of staggering around as I do early Saturday mornings sometimes, pulling things out of the car. And I'm looking over underneath one of the wax myrtles in the parking lot, and I notice what looked like a giant furry golf head cover that you find on drivers. Maybe it's because I just watched some of the U.S. Open the day before, and some of the golfers have big, head covers that look like, their alma mater or something else. I think Tiger has a big tiger head cover. And I looked at it and I thought, man, that is really unusual that would be under there. And then there was this band that looked like maybe the neck of the head cover that was red and kind of silver, and it was real small. And sometimes on Saturday mornings, as I come in, I will pick up trash from the events of the day before. It's just something that is kind of a habit of mine. And the day before Friday, we'd had a big camp, a music camp, an acting camp, and then the foster kids had been here for the Suit Up event. It had gone all day. But I was still thinking, that's unusual though, because I know they got suits and clothes, and went there, but I doubt many of them got golf clubs with, head covers, But I decided, okay, I'll go pick it up. I need it, because it's pretty obvious, even though it's under a bush, you can't miss it. So I'm walking over there with my hands full of the things, that I was carrying in that morning, and all of a sudden it moved. Not a lot, but it moved enough that I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Maybe that's not a fur head cover. And as I get closer, I realize it's the black, and it's a black and white cat. It has kind of a white chest, but all I could see was the black of it. Cat that lives around the area and often comes around the church. And the cat's head is in this. A Doritos nacho cheese bag. This one still has the nacho cheese chips in it. That one didn't. And it is tight on the cat's head, because this is a big adult cat. The cat's about this big, and there's this over the head. And as I'm getting a little bit closer to the bag, I notice the bag goes like this. So the cat is listening, right? The cat hears, but the cat can't see a thing. In fact, the cat is still probably thinking, this is a weird morning. It is pitch black outside still. I hear things moving around, including a car that came up, but it is still pitch black outside. Something is moving toward me. How can it even see me? I can't see a thing. I still don't understand how the cat was breathing inside the bag, just because it was so tight on the cat's head. But I decided I had to do something. Now, let me tell you, as you hopefully you would have thought, you know what I realized as I'm doing something, because I've done this enough in my life, hopefully you have too. I also realized as I'm moving toward the cat that this is not necessarily a safe situation. There's danger in this situation. This cat might scratch me or bite me. The cat might jump at me trying to figure out what is that moving toward me. This is the way life works. But as I'm moving forward, I realize, is it worth the risk? And I thought, yes, it is. So I move as quietly as I can, even as that little head is still going. And it doesn't move, and I bend over and reach under the bush, find the corner of the bag, grab it real quick, and yank. And that cat goes, And I go, you know, the only difference is the cat has nacho cheese Doritos all over its head, you know. I did not yet, you know, but I'm holding the bag, right? That's the way it is. I'm the one holding the bag. And then the cat runs off. That's the way it works. That's the way life is. It is fraught with danger. And just because you wanted to do a good thing and just because you thought, you know, this should be done does not mean, and don't worry, you won't get hurt or you won't get scratched or you won't get bitten or nothing bad. You can't do that. Why would you think it would work that way? But we do somehow. We think, but it doesn't work that way. Life is filled with risk. If you're going to be a dad or a mom and you're going to help your kids, you're going to get scratched. You're going to get bit sometimes. You'll even get covered in nacho cheese Doritos sometimes, right? Sure you will. Because this is the way life works. Why do you do it? Because you still should do it. It's still the right thing to do. It's still the loving thing to do, even though you may get hurt. And when you do get hurt, and when when even your kids lash out back to you, you have to be the one to say, listen, I understand. I understand why they would do it and not react to it. Abraham's having to learn the same lesson. Oh, instantly, I forgot to tell you that I wanted to add as I was walking later, I usually walk down in the road early in the morning and pray down the road. And as I'm walking down the road, it was the strangest thing. I'm walking by and I think it looks like a little business card on the road. And I thought, well, you know, I better pick that up too, because sometimes I'll pick up trash down the road also from the night before or from the Friday before. And so I pick it up and I turn it over, and it's an Amegy credit card. It's one of the church credit cards, as a matter of fact. And I think, well, that's unusual. So I look for the name, and I will not tell you what staff member was on the credit card. But there's their credit card in the middle of the road. And I had to call that staff member and tell them, I said, I found your credit card in the middle of the road. I said, my suspicion is someone has run to Home Depot and bought a lawnmower, but I don't know that for sure on your credit card. But, you know, here's your credit card back. I didn't do that. But, but I call them, because there are all sorts of things that happen that are strange and are difficult and are painful. And all you can do is try to make those things right and recover as many of them as you can, because that's just the way life works. It's the way it's supposed to work. It's part of the interpretation, the understanding of life. Let me take you a little further into this story if you want to turn to the back of your outline. 2 more points, number 4 and 5 are this. First of all, this is where you need wisdom beyond what you naturally have. This is where you need some sort of understanding, something that you've learned, something that you've been taught that is beyond how you naturally would understand and see life. Your kids will need that also. They have to learn that from someone. And then number 5, we live in a broken and troubled world that has fallen into sin. We live in a broken and troubled world that has fallen into sin. That's why there's still pain. That's why there's still difficulty. And I use this idea of falling into sin because if you look in the book of Genesis, that's actually what happens in the first part of Genesis. Adam and Eve, it's like falling into a pit. It's like falling into a dangerous place. And mankind naturally, on his own, on her own, are still trying to claw and climb and bite their way out of the dilemma, the sin that they're in, that this is just the condition of the world. And that condition will not change until the day that God himself decides to change it. And you and I are still going through all the struggles, all the difficulties that come with that. And you have to understand that as you're dealing with the world. That's why there's so many things that you cannot fix and you cannot get over. You still just have to turn and look back to God and trust that God himself has a plan and that God will work this out in his own timing. Like I said, we are 4,000 plus years after Abraham. We are still in a world that is broken and troubled and still trying to climb out of this hole that it has fallen into called sin. It means it's lost, the world has lost its relationship to God. That's the only restoration that we can bring back. In Genesis, as a matter of fact, there's this wonderful verse where after Adam and Eve sin, right, and the enemy tempts them to do things their own way and really become their own God, or look for other things to satisfy them rather than God himself. There's this verse where God actually talks about the curse, and this is in Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, and this is him speaking to Adam, but it applies to all of us. It says, and to the man he said, this means God said, since you listen to your wife, and guys, that doesn't mean don't listen to your wife. He's just talking about it as a comparison. So in parentheses and italics there, I put my insert. This is not in the scriptures. It's just because it's assumed that since you listen to your wife instead of listening to me, and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. That's a picture that life is broken and struggling because of you, because of what you did. And you can't fix it. You will fight against it the rest of your life. You will try to fight this uphill battle the rest of your life. And he says, and your life will struggle, and all your life you will struggle to scratch out a living from it. Tim Keller, in his book, Every Good Endeavor, this is a book that he wrote on sort of redeeming your job and your work. It's a really good book. This is what he says. He says, when Adam and Eve disobeyed this command, they did become like God, because that's what the enemy tempted him, say, eat of the tree, go against God, and you will be like God, as the serpent who deceived them into disobedience said they would. That is, they put themselves in God's place. They took upon themselves the right to decide how they should live and what was right and wrong for them to do. And I know you may think, but wait a minute, don't we have that right? Aren't we supposed to be trying to decide what is right and wrong for us to do? Yes, but there are two different ways you could understand that. And one is you have to make your own decisions. The other is if you want to go against God and say, I'm going to make my own decisions against him, that's a different understanding. And then he goes on to add later, because of that, he says, for them to become like God in this way was catastrophic. And then later he writes, we were designed to know, serve, and love God supremely. And when we are faithful to that design, because that's the way God designed it, when we are faithful to that design, that's when we flourish. Just to let you know, also in that book, I should have brought it out here. It's a really good book, but he has these chapters in there, and there's one place in the middle of the book where he has 4 chapters, which sort of highlight a descending order to what happens to us. And I love the names of his chapters. He said, work becomes fruitless. And that's sort of the first thing that happens because it's a struggle. It's difficult. We get confused and all of a sudden we think, why am I working? Anybody feel that way? It just becomes fruitless. Why am I doing this? Then he says, work becomes pointless. Or I would say, life becomes just meaningless. Then why am I going through all this? Then he says, so it's a descending order as he's doing it in these chapters to show you where the cause is. He says, work becomes selfish. That's true. That's the reason it's pointless and fruitless, because it has become selfish. We've messed up and we've decided it's all about us. It's just kind of natural in our sin that's where we are. That's where we struggle. And then he adds this 4th chapter. He says, and work reveals our idols. That means where we have taken our eyes off of God and looked to God as the satisfaction of our life, and we're looking to other things that they will satisfy us. They will give us meaning. They will make the point for us. The fruit will come from those things. And you say, but it does. It does. But only in a temporary way, not a lasting way, not a meaningful way. That's just the way life works. Here's the last one, number 6. So what do you do? So look to the one who understands and rescues in life. I'm going to read the rest of this passage. I know you're going to listen to this and say, well, where did you get that from? But I want you to think about what happens in the rest of this story with Abraham as he's trying to figure it out, as he's trying to understand. He doesn't come up with an answer. That's why I say that this is all about Abraham learning to look to the one who can answer, who does rescue, who does understand what's going on. Look at what it says, verse 7. It says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar because she's run away. She's like, I quit. I'm out of here. I'm not hanging around anymore. But beside a spring of water in the wilderness, along the road of Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah, she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress. Submit to her authority. Then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. Now, I want you to catch that. The angel does not say, you're right, run away. Go do it your own way. Just rid yourself, because you're not going to rid yourself of all the struggles and difficulties and whatever in life. If you start running away, you'll spend your whole life running away. I'm not saying there aren't relationships that you have to separate from. There are. But you can't run away from life. You can't run away every time something happens that you don't like it. You need an interpreter, someone to help you understand. I know. But you keep moving forward. And sometimes you're in these positions, and the positions that you're in seem like they've trapped you, or they're the things holding you back. And the angel is reminding her, no, it won't hold you back, because I will give you something. I will watch after you. Same thing Abraham had learned earlier. And it says then in verse number 11, and the angel also said, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means, say this with me, Ishmael means what? See, every time she called his name, her son's name, every time she hears someone else call her son's name, she hears, it has a meaning. She hears that God hears. She's like, that's right, God hears. God hears, that's right. KSBJ, they took this and put it into God listens. Same thing. God hears. God hears. God hears. You're not out there by yourself. He says, for the Lord has heard your cry of distress. The son of yours will be a wild man. Anybody got one of those? Yep. And as untamed as a wild donkey. I compare it to an untamed chihuahua. He will raise his fist against everyone. That means he's going to really struggle. And everyone will be against him. Yes. He will live in open hostility against all his relatives. And I know you think, and this is God's blessing? Yes, it is. Because Hagar wants a son. This is the most important thing to her. And even though God, even though the angel says these are things that will happen, he says these things will happen so that when they happen, even Hagar then knows God knows, and God was watching after me, and the promises of God are true. And if God knows what will even happen to him, and what, every time that would happen, she could look back and say, that's right. And God told me he knew. And it just proves that the promises of God will be true and that God will watch after me. It says, verse 13, therefore Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. She said, have I truly seen the one who sees me? So that well was named I can't pronounce it, but it comes from Elroy, the idea of God's name here, which means well of the living one who sees me. It can still be found between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him what? God sees, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. My wife wanted me to video. We have some geese on the pond behind our house. And so they have little chicks again. And for years, they would have chicks, and before they would get old enough to fly away or whatever, they wouldn't have chicks. Then last year, for the first time, a certain number of them actually survived, 4 of them to be adults, and eventually they flew the coop and they left, and, they live in San Antonio, or so I don't know where they live, but, they're trying to do what geese do and have their own family, which is a wonderful thing for Mama and Papa, Goose that's on our pond. So this year they've had 7 little chicks. And so she loves watching them. And when they're really little, they just, the ducks, the geese just watch after them. And she loves it because Mama and Papa are watching after the little chicks. And usually on the pond, when you see them or you see them walking on the grass, you'll see the one of the adults ahead and one behind, and the little ones in between just scampering to stay right in between in a little group. They just pile up. They do the same thing on the water everywhere they go. And so she just loves watching them. And we have to get the binoculars out and count them to make sure that there's still 7. I have no idea what we would do if there weren't, but we have to do that and to make sure. So this morning when I'm leaving, I'm driving off, and they get out of the pond sometimes they walk, and sometimes they cross the street. And so there's Mama and Papa Goose, and there are 4 chicks in the little pack in between Mama and Papa Goose. Before you get too sad, because 3 of them were out front, already crossing the road on their own. And you could hear the honking, like it wasn't my car either. It was, Mama and Papa. Like, what are you doing, right? Where are you going? What is happening? You know what's happening, right? They're becoming little adults. They want to go out on their own. They want to try on their own. It presents a whole new danger because Mama and Papa Goose got the 4 still there, and then those out front, what do we do? And listen, let's be honest, whether we like it or not, the ones that are in the most danger are the 3 going out on their own. And yet at the same time, if you could get into the Papa and Mama Goose's mind, they're probably pretty proud, like, well, there they go. Yeah, right. They're out there on their own. That's what they've got to learn to do. So you have to help them understand how to make those decisions, where to find the things to hold on to, how to navigate the stuff they can't figure out in life, and how to look to God Himself through all those struggles, knowing that there is a God who understands, who knows, who plans, who watches after us, who redeems, who rescues. Even though we can't figure it all out, and we never will, there's one that we turn to in the midst of those struggles. Would you pray for me, or pray for me? Yes, pray for me. Pray with me this morning. Heavenly Father, we thank you. You made us the way we are. You understand us. Our life is fraught with dangers, difficulties, struggles. It's not an easy life, and you understand that. You never planned that it would be easy. And in the midst of our struggles, Lord, you constantly beckon us, call out to us, even honk out to us, to look back to you, to trust you, that through this life and what is to come afterwards, that you do have a plan. As you prove faithful to Abraham over 4,000 years ago, we still remember the promises, still remember his name. Lord, it's a reminder that your promises are true, and you will be faithful, and you will rescue us and watch after us. As we continue to pray, let me ask you to do something. I bet there is a father, a dad, maybe a future father or dad sitting next to you somewhere, maybe in front of you or behind you. And just for a second, would you pray for that man, for that young boy, that God would reach his hand out? He would draw them close to himself in the middle of their confusion, their struggles, the parts of life that they can't fix, they don't even understand, the parts of life that they have to just hold even though they don't think it's fair that they have to hold it. Would you pray that God would give them strength? He would give them courage. He would give them compassion, an honesty and a willingness into life to admit they don't have it all figured out, never will, but that they have a heavenly Father who wants to know them, wants to lead them, to help them understand and interpret life through the rest of life. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.